I was lying in that sterile hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles, when the realization hit me like a second collision. The bandages wrapped around my head felt tight, my leg elevated in a cast, and my phone sat silent on the bedside table. 24 hours had passed since the truck ran that red light and sent my Honda spinning into a concrete